Okay, so we finished talking about what happens in the stomach, and if you watch the other little video, then it summarized what's happening so far with the major nutrients. So it's a different way of looking at it, and a good way to study it too. So rather than looking by region, you could start and just look at the 3 major nutrients that we're trying to break down: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. What happens where? So this video, we're going to talk about what happens in the small intestine, in the different regions, and the accessory structures that are associated with the small intestine. Okay, so the small intestine is also known as the small bowel. We often talk about bowel movement. That just means when you're trying to force things out of your bowels, and that's your intestines. So the small intestine is the small bowel, the large intestine is the large bowel. It's called small, again, because of its diameter. It's a lot longer than the large intestine, but it's smaller in diameter, so that's how wide it is across. There's 3 sections. Okay, so the first is called the duodenum or duodenum. So this is the duodenum. It's the first section after the stomach. It's a little kind of straighter. And then the middle section is the jejunum. It's pretty coiled up. Oh dear, sorry. Woo. And then the last section is the ileum, and it empties into the first part of the large intestine, the cecum. Okay, so the easiest way to find the duodenum is look for the stomach, and then it's the first part of the small intestine after the stomach. The easiest way to find the ileum is to look for the first part of the large intestine, the cecum, and then work backwards. So this would be the ileum. And then the jejunum is the part of the small intestine that's between them. So it's about 2.5 centimeters in diameter on average. The food that's entering, so the food that left the stomach, remember, it's really acidic. And it's kind of like a paste because of all the mashing together, the mechanical digestion. So it's a semi-liquid called chyme. And it flows through that valve at the bottom of the stomach called the pyloric valve or pyloric sphincter. About a teaspoon every 3 to 4 seconds is permitted through. And when that enters, it's really acidic. And so the acidity triggers conversion of this inactive hormone, prosecretin, into secretin. And like the name suggests, it goes and tells things to secrete stuff or put them out so they can be useful. So to secrete means produce and release. Okay, so secretin is carried in the blood to the pancreas and the liver, and it says, hey, release your products into the first part of the small intestine because there's food coming in and we need to break it down. So, first thing we're going to do is label more parts. Oh, sorry. It's touchy. Okay. So we said to find the first part of the small intestine, the first part, there is the small intestine. So the first line that's coming off it would be the first part called the duodenum. The duodenum. Okay. To find the last part, go find the first part of the large intestine and work backwards. So this one is the ileum. And the one in the middle is the jejunum. Okay, so the jejunum is that coiled up part between them. Okay. We had already labeled the valve before because it's at the base of the stomach. There are some accessory structures, we said, and secretin goes and tells them to release their things into the intestine. So, we're going to talk about the pancreas first. So, the pancreas is really, really important for digestion. Your pancreas is kind of cottage cheesy looking. It's a flat gland that sits between your stomach and the small intestine. Okay? It's held in place by a band of tissue that's pretty clear called mesentery. And just like the stomach released gastric juice that had enzymes in it, the pancreas releases pancreatic juice that has enzymes and stuff in it. So this is kind of a list of all the things that are, oh, goodness gracious, I'm so sorry. I don't have the PowerPoint program on here. Not PowerPoint, but the presentations program on this computer, so I can't do it that way. Alright, so this is a list of the things that are in pancreatic juice, and then we'll look at a little easier way of seeing their action. One of the things is bicarbonate ions, and we saw that last chapter when we talked about transport of carbon dioxide. Bicarbonate ions are important to be released in here because bicarbonate likes hydrogen ions. And so bicarbonate will kind of neutralize the acidic stuff that's coming in from the stomach. Okay? It picks up the hydrogen ions and it raises the pH to 8.9. So it makes it less acidic and it prevents damage. And it also activates the enzymes because the enzymes coming from the pancreas don't work when it's acidic. Whereas pepsin only works if it's acidic. So bicarbonate's really important in that it makes it safer, makes our tissues protected because it brings the acidity level to more a basic level. So it raises the pH. Gets rid of all the hydrogen ions, not all of them, but a lot. And it also activates the enzymes so that they can do their job. So they need to have it in a basic setting so that they'll work. It makes trypsinogen. So just like pepsinogen, trypsinogen has to be activated. So once it gets in the small intestine, then it's going to be activated to trypsin. That's done by a certain enzyme. You don't have to really know about that enzyme, but it's an intestinal enzyme. That means that the intestine makes it. Are you okay, Nay? No? Okay. I'm going to pause again. 1 sec. Okay. Back again. Where were we? Okay. So we talked about trypsinogen and that it's the inactive form of trypsin, and as soon as it gets down into the intestine, there's an enzyme in the intestine that will activate it. There's also peptidases, so A's at the end often means it's an enzyme. It always means it's an enzyme you're talking about. And usually, what's at the first of it is describing what it acts on. So peptidases are enzymes that act on peptides. So there's peptidases that will continue the work of pepsin and trypsinogen to break down proteins. Okay, so pancreatic amylase. Remember we talked about salivary amylase. So salivary amylase started breaking down the carbohydrates in the mouth. So pancreatic amylase is now going to act in the small intestine in order to break down the carbohydrates even further. Lipases, A's means it's an enzyme. Lip is referring to lipid. So they help to break down lipids. And then there's also ribonucleases and deoxyribonucleases. So these are enzymes that act on ribonucleic acid and deoxyribonucleic acid. So they break down RNA and DNA, basically. This is a little easier view of what their action is. So, trypsin, once trypsinogen had been activated into trypsin, trypsin acts on the large polypeptides that are coming from the stomach and breaks them down into the smaller peptides. And then those peptides are acted on by peptidases to break them right into amino acids. The dextrins that we saw being produced in the mouth from salivary amylase action on the larger polysaccharides, they're going to be acted on by pancreatic amylase in order to break them into disaccharides. Fats will be acted on by lipases to get glycerol and fatty acids, but something special has to happen for lipases to be able to work on them. RNA is acted on by ribonucleases and DNA by deoxyribonucleases in order to get individual nucleotides. So that's the action that happens as a result of the pancreatic enzymes in the intestine. The intestine itself also produces enzymes. So, let's see. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But the liver is another accessory structure. So this is the pancreas, the cottage cheesy looking one, but this is the liver. So this was the part that you probably weren't sure of where to put when you were building your body. The liver has a number of cool. Sorry. The liver has a number of functions. In terms of digestion, its job is to produce bile. Okay? And bile is what we call an emulsifier of fat. So it is produced in the liver. It's stored in the gallbladder. The gallbladder doesn't produce it, but it's like a storage sac. And it sits, you can always find it right close to the liver because it sits and holds like a storage vat. So some people have their gallbladder removed and they can still function fine because the liver still makes bile. It's just they won't have as much. So they usually recommend that they don't have as high a fat diet because they don't have as much bile for each meal. Okay, so it's released into the duodenum, so the first part of the small intestine, through the bile duct as it's needed. Its job is to break the great big globules of fat down into smaller pieces, so fat molecules, so individual molecules instead of them all being stuck. Remember, fats don't really like water, so the fats kind of, think of oil and water, then they kind of all stick together. So it breaks them apart so that the lipases, the enzymes, can get at them. Other functions that the liver has, a huge one is that it detoxifies harmful substances, so any alcohol or medications or other drugs and things that go into your body, they are detoxified by the liver. So your liver is really, really important, but we can do a lot of damage to it depending on what we take into our bodies. So got to be really careful because you don't want to damage your liver. You need it to keep you healthy for your life. Another job, sorry. Wow, it's like totally, I don't know why it's doing that. Anyway. So, your liver converts excess glucose. So if you had a big meal, then your cells are going to take in so much if they need it at the time. But anything extra, the first place it's going to go is to be stored as glycogen in your liver and in your muscles, so that you have an extra source of glucose for your brain in times of when you don't have enough energy, and also energy for your muscles. Then it'd be anything extra beyond that is going to be converted to fat. I'm sorry, my husband's making me laugh. Going to be converted to fat. So if you overeat, then that's why sometimes we put on weight, because we've gone beyond what we need in glycogen stores, and then we store anything beyond that in fat. Okay, another job it has is to regulate amino acid levels in the blood. It stores fat-soluble vitamins. It helps to destroy bacteria in the blood, because blood always has to pass through your liver so it can be detoxified. Okay, so it helps to destroy any pathogens, so it kind of helps the immune system that way. And it breaks down old blood cells and recycles the useful parts. But when it breaks down the old blood cells, the hemoglobin is broken down in your liver and produces pigments that are kind of go with the bile, so they're called bile pigments. And the bile pigments are released with the bile into your intestines, and so that's what gives your feces or your poop a certain color. McCary thought that was funny. Okay, so it's the bile pigments that are in the bile that give it its funny color. But if you noticed, bile is made up of bile salts and pigments, but there's no enzymes in bile. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to label some more. So we finished the small intestine, now we're going to find the large intestine. So it's the bigger one here. Oh no, we're on the... What am I talking about? Oh, we're on the accessory structures. Oh, silly. Didn't get much sleep last night. Right. Okay, so here's the duodenum. It's the first part of the small intestine. And so these accessory structures put their products into the duodenum because that's where a lot of the last digestion, that's where a bulk of the digestion happens in the duodenum. So, between the stomach and the small intestine, you'll find the cottage cheesy looking pancreas. So this is the pancreas. This would be the pancreatic duct that leaves the pancreas. This organ here, okay, is the liver. And just under the liver is a small sac called the gallbladder. Okay, so this would be the common bile duct. It's called the common bile duct because the pancreatic duct will join on with it too as they empty things into the small intestine, into the duodenum. Okay, so liver, gallbladder, pancreas is always between the stomach and the small intestine. Alright, so we're going to look a little closer at what bile does. So when we first talked about types of digestion, we talked about physical or mechanical and chemical. So if there's no bonds broken, then we call it physical. So the physical ones that we talked about so far were chewing in your mouth and the mashing due to the muscle action in your stomach. So this is another type of physical digestion, and it acts on fats. So we haven't seen anything to do with fat breakdown really yet, except for the chewing and the mashing. So this is what bile does. If we look at fat, remember it's made up of, this is a fat molecule. So glycerol and 3 fatty acids makes a fat molecule. But fats don't like water, so they form a fat globule in order to hide their hydrophobic parts, the tails, the fatty acid tails, away from water. Glycerol is okay to be near the water. So we have fat globules that come in our food stuff. When we're breaking down our food stuff, the fat globules are going to come in with the chyme into your small intestine, and they need to be pulled apart so that the enzymes, the lipases, can break fats down. So the bile salts, the bile salts that are in the bile will surround the hydrophobic parts of the fat molecules and pull them apart so they don't have to be in a fat globule anymore. So they surround them. Now they're individual fat molecules that the lipases can break down. Okay, so bile breaks down fat globules into fat molecules. So then they can be acted on in a chemical way by the lipases. So here's a fat molecule, lipase, so think lipid, enzyme that breaks down lipid. Lipases will act on the fat molecules and break them down into glycerol and fatty acids. That is chemical digestion. This was physical or mechanical digestion. Awesome. The intestinal juice. So we said gastric juice. That was from the stomach. So glands in the walls of the stomach. The pancreatic juice is solution from the pancreas, and it has enzymes in it. Well, the intestines make some too. So it's called intestinal juice, and intestinal juice has more of kind of what we've seen. So it has peptidases, like before, breaks the peptides into amino acids. Lipases, which continue because the digestion is going to continue along the intestine for a bit. Okay? So the lipases are going to break down lipids or fats into glycerol and fatty acids. Now we have disaccharases too. So the disaccharases include maltase, sucrase, and lactase, and they act on disaccharides to give you monosaccharides. So I expect you to be able to tell me it breaks down disaccharides, which kind of is implied from the name of the enzyme, into monosaccharides. 2 sugar units into 1 sugar units. If I said, what enzyme acts on maltose, you should be able to tell me just by changing the O to an A. Okay? So maltase acts on maltose, sucrase acts on sucrose, and lactase acts on lactose. I don't expect you to know what the disaccharides are composed of, what monosaccharides make them up. Okay, but you should easily be able to tell me what's the name of the disaccharase that acts on maltose or sucrose or lactose. Cool. Okay, I'm going to pause there and we'll do a different one on the large intestine.